Despite the traditional technicals contradicting each other, one key thing of importance has occurred, something that changes everything. Bitcoin is now back to being strongly bullish, and here's exactly why. Within technical analysis, we deal with probabilities and odds, and those odds can change fast and without warning, and that's precisely what's happened since the last episode. Something has happened that makes me confident from a probabilistic point of view that the bottom has been set. And that big key turn of events is exactly what we'll discuss today. But before getting there, let me remind you all about this episode, which is a mandatory watch for anybody who watches technical analysis videos on YouTube. It explains precisely how you should approach any technical analysis and why. It's in fact so important that I'll stress it again. You must watch it. And that's for your own sake entirely, so that you don't get tangled up in out of context trades. For those dear viewers can hurt badly. Let's now go straight to the analysis, but first, not financial advice. Read the disclaimer at the beginning if in doubt. And with that said, let's get to the juicy stuff. From a neutral technical point of view, Bitcoin is at a crossroads, and whatever it decides to do from here could and should have significant implications in the short to mid term. Let's begin by looking at the old-fashioned technicals. First of all, Bitcoin is trading right at a significant horizontal resistance zone. This zone constitutes the pivotal January all-time high at 42,000, a top that required both time and effort to push through. Now that very same zone instead acts as a rather heavy resistance block. And as if that weren't enough, Bitcoin's still battling with the overhead EMA ribbons on the daily. On the weekly chart, on the other hand, Bitcoin is trading right at a diagonal support. Although I would never base any trades on such lines, they still give an overall guide on the trend and health as a whole. And especially so as the weekly EMA ribbons perfectly align with the current price. We therefore already have a conflict in the technicals, as they contradict one another. The weekly chart is bullish, whereas the daily chart is not. And to make things even more confusing, if we zoom in on the 4-hour chart, we can see that the price has finally, after 1 month of accumulation, begun to establish higher highs and higher lows. This accumulation is best confirmed by the whipsaw movements up and below from the EMA ribbons. And as of producing this episode, it now seems to have found support on those ribbons, and if they hold up both now and on the next test, it should be an indication of a trend reversal, a bullish one. Now, what this all tells us is that the technicals on the weekly and 4-hour charts keep pushing Bitcoin higher, whereas the daily chart provides Bitcoin with a strong overhead resistance cluster. And in this sense, each time frame has its own story to tell. Not helpful at all. And throughout this seemingly little accumulation, the price has been pushed around by the high and low time frames for quite some time now. Naturally, the more it's bullied, the stronger the price revenge punch will eventually be. So, are we going up or are we going down? Well, there are two answers to that, one boring one and one good one. The boring answer is that no one knows. The good answer, on the other hand, is that the odds have suddenly chosen a side and speak strongly in favor for the bulls. But why then is that? This brings us to the one ring to rule them all. Here's where things get really interesting, the very essence of this episode, and I'm sure some of you already know where this is heading. Less than a week ago, Bitcoin was given a lower bullish red RSI signal on the daily for a strong buy. And the beautiful part about these strategies is that they identify bottoms way before any traditional TA ever will, and tops too for that matter. For ultimately, resistances break. Always, and lower bullish red and upper bearish blue signals are generally much more reliable in their timing than any other technicals and indicators combined. And it's not even close. In fact, it's so far ahead that it makes all other TA look pathetic in comparison. In this case, the buy signal was given already at 35,500, and the ever so more beautiful part is that whenever those signals fail, they do so at absolute minimal losses. This causes any RSI signals to come with massive risk to rewards. And again, to those of you who still haven't watched this remarkable trilogy on the RSI strategies, do yourself a solid for once in your life. I'd go as far as to say that this might be the most important piece of trading tutorial on all of YouTube. So check it out and be the judge yourself. What this signal alone tells me is that Bitcoin in fact stands a strong chance of pushing through these resistances, and that if it were to, the chances of a 27k retest is significantly decreased. What would be rather more likely in such case is for a bounce down from around 50k to test the current resistance zone as support before taking off once and for all, but more on that in just a bit. What I find extremely interesting too is how Marathon Digital Holdings in turn recently generated a buy signal on the daily as well. That signal is still intact and very much in play, and to be perfectly clear, this stuff is rarely a coincidence, especially taking into account that their respective lower bullish red lines on the daily are set at completely different values. In this sense, they are entirely independent from each other, yet they tell the very same story, and that story is bullish, strongly bullish. Now, these big timeframe supports in combination with the lower bullish red signal give me strong reason to believe the bottom has in fact been in. And bear in mind, I wouldn't conclude that if it had not been for the lower bullish red line. And that's how strong and reliable they are. And again, if we were to get stopped out, all we stand to lose is peanuts. Which is fine, because I'm not that big a fan of nuts anyway. With that said, if the bottom has been in at 30,000 sharp, I still wouldn't expect the price to simply take off to the moon from here. No, what's more in the cards would be for Bitcoin to close in on the 50,000s and face at least some temporary struggle on the diagonal overhead resistance. This I'd expect to somewhat match any of the fib retracements, either the 618 if it were to occur sometime around next week, or if it decides to drag this accumulation process to its furthest extent, then the 0.5 fib in mid to late July. Personally, I don't hold the latter for particularly likely, and the reason is simple. For lower bullish red signals don't just tell us when a low is in, it tends to be followed by aggressive price movements. The RSI signals rarely waste our time. For this reason, I do expect some movement in Bitcoin, and equally so some temporary rejection, ideally down to test the horizontal box from above as support. For that, my dear viewers, that would be the ideal healthy scenario and buy spot alike. For all this would still make the lower bullish red signal intact. And to further add to the strength case, Bitcoin would have been long enough in pain and dread mode to be ready for a move up. Now, I'm very well aware that this is counter to my previous analysis, in which I talked about a likely dip down to 27,000. If Bitcoin were to break below the lower bullish red with more than its standard 1% margin, then everything I said in the previous episode still stands. Each and every word. And I would in fact expect Bitcoin to get down there should the lower bullish red on the daily get stopped out. Yet despite everything, this on its own would be bullish, naturally given that it reverses in a sharp V-shaped formation as discussed in detail. But for now, as we were mercifully given a generous lower bullish red buy signal and one with a most impressive track record, I'm going nowhere. With that said, and based on Marathon's synchronized signal, I've rather laddered in more heavily since. Things have truly begun to look good, and all thanks to one simple line. That was all for now. Thank you and goodbye.